So I'm coming from a university, right? And at universities, we have this tendency of living in cocoons. So we sometimes don't see what's going on out there, and it can be a bit of a problem. So about a few days ago, I was reading the newspaper, and a particular article came out in a local publication. And the headline said, unemployed graduates blame education system for joblessness, right? That hit me right in the guts. I don't know, how many of you agree? Let's be honest. How many of you believe that? How many of you believe that graduates are unemployed because of a faulty education system? Let's see by show of hands. You're all just, okay. We've got a few people who agree, right? Right. So I couldn't have been the only person in my education system community who was kicked in the fields, because it turned out that the very next day, in the same newspaper, an article came out, and the headline of the article said, Zim unemployment, education system not linked. Right? Next day, same newspaper. How many of you agree with that? That the education system is not linked. Right? Okay. But here's where the challenge is. I want you to think from the point of view of a parent. Right? I'm assuming some of you have children who are ready to go to college. Some of your children are in college. Now, if somebody came and told you that all of the money that you're paying has no bearing on the employment opportunities, how would you feel? Right? Because every single parent, when they're sending their children to school, they honestly believe that there's a connection between the two. Right? So we can't keep pretending that there isn't one. Okay? So as Mr. Mataridon actually mentioned, I teach biotechnology at the Harare Institute of Technology. Now, biotechnology is the development of economically beneficial things from living systems or their natural products. That's essentially the definition. So if you think antibiotics, if you think vaccines, if you think biofuels, if you think biofertilizers, all of that falls into biotechnology, right? Now, as interesting as it is, it's very important that we pay attention to the fact that for you to work as a biotechnologist, you need to be trained as a biotechnologist, right? Seems obvious. However, the opposite is not necessarily true. You can be trained as a biotechnologist and not find work as a biotechnologist. And that is the case for a lot of our students. Right? And I was blown away by one of the speakers who actually talked about side hustles, because at the end of the day, this is the reality. Now, for a lot of our students, it's not a side hustle, it's the full hustle, right? Now, but the one thing that we need to pay attention to is it's not a uniquely Zimbabwean problem. Because as many as 50% of African graduates are unemployed. So all across the continent, right? And there are some people who actually believe that the problem is that there is a mismatch between the skills that they're getting in university and the labor market. Now, we can look at it from this point of view. So let me look at it, let me direct you as a biotechnologist. Okay, so in this country, you have many food manufacturing companies, you've got pharmaceutical companies, you've got agribusiness companies. Each and every one of these companies has ingredients, right, that are derived from biotechnological products, right? A lot of these ingredients, they need them, but these ingredients are not made locally. So they import these ingredients. However, the technology to actually make these ingredients exists. Now, if we were able to match the skills that we're training the students with labor needs, we would be teaching them how to make these products. And the reason why it would be important for us to be teaching them is it's unfair for us to train them for jobs that don't exist. So it's in our best interest to train them to create jobs for themselves, right? Okay, so if we are looking at biotechnology, the biotechnology department that I work at is based at the Harare Institute of Technology, right? Now, the Harare Institute of Technology is, well, I think a very interesting institution because it's a technical university, right? So a technical university is a university that exclusively trains STEM professionals to suit market needs. So if you think MIT, if you think those kinds of institutes, or that is a technical university. It focuses on training STEM professionals. And for those who might be unaware, a STEM professional is a scientist, a technologist, an engineer, or a mathematician. So it trains them to suit market needs. Now, the interesting thing that you'll notice about STEM professionals is they've got one thing in common with entrepreneurs. And that thing that they have in common is they are not afraid of failure. Because the truth of the matter is, you cannot innovate, right, if you are not willing to try new things. And you cannot try new things if you're not willing to fail at the things that you do. Because when you try, sometimes it's not going to work out. But you need to learn from that experience and then try something different, right? Remember, something different. The definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Okay, so, and that idea of being able to try new things is terrifying. It is terrifying. And we have to learn to transcend the fear of failure. Because otherwise, we can't innovate. Otherwise, we can't try new things. We can't fix anything. We can't change anything. So, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. With all the articles that you've read about graduate unemployment, have you ever noticed that they're exclusively talking about universities? Universities are not the only tertiary institutions. Why aren't we talking about trade schools? Where are the unemployed hairdressers? Where are the unemployed construction workers? Where are the unemployed plumbers? You'll notice something very interesting about trade schools. People at trade schools have an entrepreneurial spirit that's cultivated within them from the get-go. When somebody starts at the local polytechnic or the local trade school, once they've gotten their certificate, they're gone. An auto mechanic doesn't have to look for a job somewhere. He just starts his business. That entrepreneurial spirit is cultivated from the beginning. And that is something that needs to be transferred to the university at large. That is something that I, as a biotechnologist, have to be able to transfer to my students. They have to know that they can produce things. When they've gotten their certificate, they have to develop something, right? Now, HIT has a very unique history because HIT started out as a trade school in the 1980s, and then it eventually became a university in the mid-2000s. So that matters because now that DNA of an entrepreneurial spirit is still there. And that's the reason why, as an institute, they try not to think in the same way that universities think. They try and think like a trade school, because that is what is necessary in the environment that we live. Because we have to see the reality. Zimbabwe has the second largest informal economy in the world, right? The second largest informalized economy in the world, which means that the majority of graduates, when 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, 90% of people working in the formal sector, 10% were working in the informal sector. Whereas now, the reverse is the truth. So the informal sector is the sector. Now, it drives the economic process, true. But the informal sector has a few challenges with it. The three major challenges are: a person who works in the informal sector has no social protection. If anything happens, that's it. I think we noticed during the COVID era, when people couldn't move around, people in the informal sector actually struggled a bit. Although that comes with a pinch of salt, because some of them came up with very clever innovations using WhatsApp. But that's a story for another day. The second challenge that the informal sector has is they don't have access to financing. So their businesses are doomed to stay small. They can't grow beyond their current structure. And the final issue with the informal sector is the fact that the businesses are usually not taxed. So try and imagine, in the Zimbabwean context, if as many as 64 to 65% of the country's GDP is coming from an informal sector, that means the tax base is only coming from 35%. How can we possibly grow, right? So we have to find innovative ways of connecting ourselves to the formal sector. Now, the challenges that actually exist in the informal sector affect all fields, including my particular field of biotechnology. Because let's think about it. I don't know how many of you are familiar with those little bottles of whiskey that are sold in the streets, right? Right. Now, the thing is, those guys are very entrepreneurial because they came up with their own microbreweries, so to speak, where they developed their own alcoholic beverages, which in a different environment, if we were in Germany or if we were in some parts of South Africa, it's encouraged. However, the challenge that's there is because it's informal, and because of the challenges that exist with the informal sector in terms of growth and access to finances, they have to cut corners, which means the quality and the standards of the product are compromised. That means that at the end of the day, you might have an alcoholic beverage which has certain ingredients that are less than safe for human consumption. And the alcohol contents might be higher than they should be, right? Now, if we're thinking of other biotech products, think of the traditional medical practitioners. Now, those guys, they actually supply a lot of the medicines that we use in our parts of the world, right? As many as 80% of people who live in Africa actually rely upon traditional medical practitioners. So they are an essential part of our health system. However, the challenge that exists is they are not aware of how some of their complementary medicines will interact with different herbs or with different foods and with different drugs. And that interaction, in some cases, might be toxic. So we need to make formalizing the informal sector an urgent issue, particularly for us in the biotech, not just for us in the biotech sector, but for all different sectors. Now, you need a strategy to be able to do that. Now, there's a particular paper that was actually done, and in this particular study, what they noticed was they came up with practical recommendations of how this can be addressed. So it's a local paper written by Mukarangi et al., and it was published in 2022. So this particular paper, Mukarangi and his colleagues came up with 4 different things that need to be addressed. Now, the 4 different things that need to be addressed to be able to formalize the informal sector are: the first one is engagement. You need to be able to engage the community with information at no cost. Remember, at no cost. Because I'm not going to pay for information if I don't even know that I need it. The second thing that they need to be able to do is to be able to teach people in the informal sector about certain entrepreneurial endeavors, about how to be able to grow their businesses in a cost-effective manner. Because the information that actually exists, the teaching that exists, needs to be imparted on those guys. Because a lot of them aren't going to find themselves sitting in a university classroom, so the universities have to go to them. The third thing that needs to be done is we need to besides education and engagement, we need research. Okay, so the powers that be, they know that there's a problem, but they don't know how to deal with it. Because a holistic approach needs to be developed for us to be able to develop a strategy for bringing the informal sector into the formal sector. But they have no idea how to do it. So research needs to be done to come up with holistic solutions to be able to connect the informal sector to the formal sector. And finally, innovation. You need to get to a point whereby the education system innovates to the point whereby it can develop ways of making the entrepreneurial exploits of the informal sector more efficient. Because people should be able to access products and services. Now, we have 5 pillars. I mentioned 4. The 5th one I didn't mention because the 5th one is obvious, commercialization. Because the informal sector is commercial, right? So that one goes without saying. So beyond commercialization, you've got commercialization, innovation, you've got engagement, you've got teaching, and you've got research. These 5 pillars are what the modern education system needs to sit on. Because for us to be able to reimagine our future, we need an education system that takes us there. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you so much. You are saying what we can do. What can we do? Can you tell these people what we can do actually to solve our issues?
What we can do as individuals or as a country at large?
No, we are talking as individuals.
Okay. So I think the one thing that we need to do is one of our speakers was talking about starting side hustles, right? The idea of being able to understand how the informal sector thinks, right, is to be a part of the informal sector. One of the ways in which we can actually aid in entrepreneurship is if we learn about entrepreneurship, and the best way to learn about entrepreneurship is to do entrepreneurship. That's what we do.
Super side hustles. I think you heard that topic. Thank you so much, Dr. William Mavengere.